go up, or? Well, thank you very much, Michael. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to match your energy in comparing skills, but I'll try my best. I'm delighted to be able to be here to compare this session, which, as you can see, is a fireside chat, policy mechanisms to mobilise finance. And in particular, we're going to be discussing JETP's, Just Energy Transition Partnerships. Now, obviously, these were formally announced at COP26, and then the implementation model came forward at COP27. So a really great example of delivery, not just at COPs, but in between COPs also, a key theme, obviously, of this net zero delivery summit. I'm delighted that I have two expert panelists to join this fireside chat, who've both played a leading role in helping to establish JETPs and their implementation. We have Janice Johnston, financing advisor for the South African JETP. She was part of the project management unit and also the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team, which led the negotiation of South Africa's JETP. So Janice, please come up. Thanks very much. Please take a seat. And secondly, Chris Taylor, who is actually the UK's JETP Envoy at the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. And previously, I mean, Chris has had a fantastically long history. He looks far younger than actually his actual biography suggests, starting right back, I think, with being one of the authors of the Stern Review in 2006. But he was the deputy COP envoy at COP26, and so has real lived experience of getting the JETP process off the ground. Chris, come and join us. Thanks very much. So to kick off a discussion, because I'm acutely conscious that when we have these discussions, sometimes people are sitting in the room thinking, what exactly is a JETP? And I know it was discussed about the Vietnamese JETP. So I want to turn to Chris first to sort of ask, in terms of the JETP structure and framework, how did it sort of come about? What's so different from things that have gone before, and where are we now with the process?
Sure, yeah. So as you touched on, the first one came about at COP26 with the launch of South Africa. That was very much a sort of a coming together of minds. I think that it was sort of designing by doing at that point in terms of setting out what could be done. But we sort of developed through that a sort of clear country platform model that actually had wider application, which is why we've expanded it elsewhere. So just to be clear, I think the key features are that you've got the scale, you've got the ambition, you've got very much a sort of country-led process that tries to bring together many of the components you need at the same time. So Michael in the previous section touched on how you have the finance, but it's not as simple as just redirecting it. You need a number of components to come together, and you can have a bit of a sort of chicken and egg problem between setting the ambition, setting the clarity of the goals, having the policies that are necessary to deliver that, and really pulling in the finance that needs to deliver that. And JETPs are trying to do all that at once, bringing all that together. So you sort of, rather than having a chicken and egg problem, you're sort of getting chicken and egg, sort of agreeing a contact with a supermarket, building the coop all at the same time to try and bring all those components out. So you've got the headline targets, you've got the commitment to some of the policies that are necessary to deliver that, and you're really trying to match up the finance and bring out the projects with the implementation phase to deliver that. So you've got the high-level commitment from the country, very much a country-led model. You're bringing in the just components and making sure resources are dedicated towards that, because that's necessary for a durable transition and the right thing to do regardless. And really focusing on coordinating between countries that are providing that support, providing the government itself, the host country that's leading the process, coordinating within itself, and then sort of working directly more with the private sector and others to help coordinate how that input comes together. So it's trying to bring it all together to sort of deliver more of that system-level change that you need, because you're not going to be able to do this with a more sort of project piecemeal basis. So in terms of where we've gone, we've now got, as well as the South African one, which has moved into more of the implementation phase, we've now got JETPs launched with Vietnam, as Ambassador Long spoke about earlier, that was launched in December, and Indonesia, which was launched at the G20 summit last October. Yes.
And Janice, it was mentioned obviously that the South African JETP has moved to its implementation phase. What sort of visible progress is there so far from your perspective, and how is the JETP sort of mobilising capital in order to ensure a fair and just energy transition in South Africa?
So thank you very much for having me on the panel. So as mentioned, the South Africa Just Energy Transition Partnership was established at the COP26, and as part of that, the International Partners Group committed to mobilizing $8.5 billion across the 5 partners within the group, as well as the Accelerated Coal Transition Investment Plan was all part of that package. And off of the back of that accelerated NDC commitment, or more ambitious commitment South Africa had committed to on a just and inclusive basis, we articulated an investment plan. And that was important as a precursor to the implementation phase to really understand the scale of need. So actually that investment plan that was delivered at COP was far greater than just the amount that was committed in the IPG offer. It set out all the different types of interventions that needed to take place across the 3 priority sectors in order to get to those particular targets, and very core focus on the just and inclusive manner for that, to understand the social consequences of this transition and to ensure that those most affected would have the support and the requirements they need in terms of retraining, development, economic diversification opportunities. So now that the plan has been defined, we had to go through a process of consultation with various stakeholders, because bringing everyone along in this is key critical to its sustainable success. So that has happened, and as you mentioned, we have moved to an implementation phase. And here we're really looking at unlocking those commitments, ensuring that they mobilized in the most efficient and effective way, such that they can crowd in additional capital, given that the scale of need is far greater than what is on offer at the moment. And traction to date has been interesting. So 2 of the bilateral sovereign loans from 2 of the partners, France and Germany, have been deployed of 300 million euros each into the national treasury. And those are for JETP related initiatives. The grant component has been a lot of work has been done to understand the mapping thereof and where that's going. And then work is being done to unlock the additional concessional elements and the funding that's likely to go into the private sector area, such that we can really deliver on what we understand our main focus on transmission at the moment.
And Chris, in terms of, you mentioned a number of the countries that now have JETPs in operation or being established. What other opportunities do you think there are for this mechanism to be sort of taken at further scale amongst other sort of emerging markets?
Sure, yeah. So I think, so with the JETPs so far, there's been quite a strong focus on some of the most knotty problems, in fact, where the transformation is needed, where there's a big coal pipeline, there's a lot of investment existing in coal already. And that's where some of the transformation challenges are particularly acute. And so it's really sort of tailored for that at the moment, but there's a question about how far we extend that and what models might be appropriate in other contexts. I think the key features are widely extendable. So you're already seeing it, I think, the example, I think, from the Ministry of Finance this morning that Egypt launched at the COP27 on the NOEFI model. That was something whereby it had, I'm not saying, you know, this idea of country platforms and setting out these plans isn't unique. It had many of the same features. So you set this headline ambition, you set out the detail, they got support from EBRD and others to help think about how you mobilised and coordinated the finance. So I think this model has much wider application. I think to help support countries, I think these projects can give a real demonstration effect to give countries more commitment, more confidence to set out the nature of the targets, and that if with the right policies, the finance really can flow. And to give the challenge to us to think about how we can coordinate to support that, and also think about, you know, we're not making further decisions about where there are discussions ongoing on some further JETPs, but we'll have to think about whether there is a wider application or whether it's thinking about the wider ecosystem. The components need to be designed to support this level of change that's needed.
And Janice, you've set out sort of what progress has been made so far in South Africa. I know it's always difficult, but obviously it'd be great for us to sort of learn some of the lessons from your sort of lived experience. Where do you think some of the barriers have been sort of so far that have limited maybe the success you'd hope for? And are there sort of things policymakers and investors can do additionally to work to overcome those barriers?
Sure. So I suppose it is worth noting that it's early days. So, we're certainly working on a lot of the challenges that we face. And so I think that the most important learnings that we've got to start with has been the importance of stakeholder engagements and to ensure that the transition process and the way it's been understood is well socialized and communicated to the broader stakeholder groups, including civil society, those most affected, so that there's an alignment to the extent possible on the trajectory, because I think the success of this program has to be felt on the ground. There's obviously the decarbonisation and emissions reduction, which are key critical, but the social element needs to be felt in the communities that are most affected, and that needs to address things like energy access, security, and economic diversification. So that needs to be well articulated, because it's hard for those communities to understand what that could be if they don't see it right now. And so therefore there can be this resistance to change, even if at a philosophical level everyone does understand the importance of the decarbonisation agenda. So that's been one. I think, you know, with something that is quite so complex and variously overarches so many government departments, areas, communities, etc., you know, that coordination and alignment element needs to be well understood and coordinated. So having, so ourselves with a project management unit, we sit within the presidency department, so we have that slightly sort of overarching lens. I think that has been an important aspect that I think will help hopefully to unlock some of the potential barriers as they unfold in implementation.
And Chris, I saw you sort of nodding in agreement on a couple of these points. It'd be interesting to see whether you've seen that similar issues with some of the other JETPs, whether it's too early to be able to tell. But I wanted to ask you actually about the COP process, and obviously we're here today in between COPs, in the 6 months sort of gap between COP27 and COP28. And I was wondering what lessons we could learn from previous COPs in driving forward joint transition projects, in particular ahead of COP28. Are there sort of lessons that you think we could learn from the processes that have gone before? Again, where can we sort of avoid sort of taking wrong turnings?
Yeah, I mean, I think just picking up on some of those barriers points, I think the JETPs are sort of quite helpful at sort of tying the system level points together and maintaining that momentum, but those challenges do always exist, and I think it's that coordination is really helpful. In terms of tying it to the COP processes, I mean, COPs are, I mean, you touched on my first one was about 2008, and they were quite smaller events then, and they've sort of grown quite a lot since then in terms of what's taking place there. And they do present that sort of enormous milestone. Quite often we don't mean to have them as focal points and milestones as we try and get on with our work, but they do act almost as a backstop to make sure that there is delivery focus, and you having senior representatives and leaders coming together wanting to tell a positive story, which is really welcome, and that acts as a sort of a driving force for momentum in terms of delivering on some of these breakthroughs and making these sort of announcements and making sure countries have a platform and an opportunity to talk very positively about the action that's taking place. So I think they can get too much focus, and we should be looking to maintain all our momentum we can, particularly in the implementation phase in between, but then trying to make the most of those moments as they take place and use those platforms to sort of bring together. But also just to share the experience across these different stories. I think that's really helpful from that perspective in terms of people going along, people having a chance to sort of meet up and hear firsthand about what's taking place in South Africa and elsewhere in countries, taking to the stage and talking about that in ways that help share that experience and integrate with the full set of attendees that are now there. There's now far greater representation from finance and other sectors than there used to be 15 years ago, which is only welcome in terms of driving those interactions.
And Janice, obviously you were part of the negotiating team that sort of put together the JETP for South Africa. So you sort of formally agreed during the COP process. How have you found then engagement in between COPs? Have you sort of been able to also collaborate with the other countries and share best practice and lessons learned with Indonesia or Vietnam. I mean, what would you say would be a key message for sort of driving forwards continuous success and delivery?
So we have been fortunate that there was a conference that was put together at the end of last year by the African Climate Foundation with other sponsors that brought together a number of the countries looking at the JETP process or started the process, and ourselves. So there are some sort of events that are going to be used in order for specific events to share those learnings, but we also are having some bilateral conversations with various countries as well to share. I mean, I think some of the things that we're sort of looking potentially to increase or to understand better in terms of the catalytic nature of the funding and how it's able to be accessible in a reliable and consistent and understandable way, and to the extent that we can actually combine some of these financial offerings to simplify the offers, for example. That's some of the feedback that we're giving, because I think that at the moment, in terms of the way that they put together, and it can be quite sort of complex and difficult to actually unlock some of those offers. And so I think while we unblock some of the challenges, we're certainly hoping to share that with other countries as well, so that we can really accelerate the deployment at scale.
And in terms of thinking about mobilising finance within the private sector and the investment community, see, we're here at Mansion House, Corporation of London, keen to look at how we can deliver further, faster on this. How can London-based investors leverage their financial power to support further climate action, in particular how to get involved with the JETPs, and what are the opportunities for potential future collaborations?
So I think with the JETPs, there is now this idea that there is an investment plan. So I say first and foremost is if there's an intentional commitment to participate, within the various financing institutions, is perhaps to have a look at the plan and understand where the focus areas are and how that aligns with your own institution's mandate, focus, and involvement, so that can immediately create some sort of matching within those areas. And also to understand the local context, I think is key critical in these areas, as well as appreciating that there can be a flow of value creation between both parties, and that investing in strong growth opportunities within an emerging market context can definitely be mutually beneficial, and some of the emerging markets can benefit from the financial structuring and the technology that has been well understood in the developed markets, and that can be replicable in a local context in those environments. So I think there's definitely opportunity from a diversification perspective, and also from this understanding that climate finance is very difficult to not fully appreciate the interdependencies of all global markets in this area, and therefore everyone has a part to play. So I would certainly encourage that mobilisation and focus initially within the various investment plans, and then obviously through the different offices to understand more where that funding can find a home.
And Chris, as the UK's JETP Envoy, is there a message you'd like to send out to the sort of London's climate financial community around how they could get further involved through the sort of Foreign Office?
Yeah, I mean, so definitely the JETPs expand the space, I think, for the private sector. We've had quite a lot of strong coordination with some of the other JETPs through GFANs as well. So that coordination within governments, with the international community and also with the private sector, I think is very helpful in terms of giving clear, consistent messages. So as part of the Indonesia and Vietnam finance, there's sort of there's some that announced that they're expecting to mobilise in support of delivery of the JETPs is outlined. The situation varies, I think, between the countries. So in South Africa, you've got slightly deeper and wider capital markets than perhaps you have, well, definitely than you have in Vietnam. It's about 3 times the size. Proportionally, and about 6 times the size of Indonesia. So the need for where the private finance is needed varies across some of these, and that will affect the sort of projects that are potentially most needed. So in some settings, it will be where we have more experience in this country than perhaps some of the local banks do. So in areas such as energy trading or waste to energy or some of the more innovative areas, the local system will be less familiar and they have less experience. And I think where that international experience can really come to bear and make a sort of more transformational difference, I think, is in some of those spaces. So in some areas, there'll be more in those opportunities. In some areas, there'll be more of a direct need for private finance across the whole piece. But the aim of JETP is very much to just expand that space to allow that finance to flow.
And just one final quick question for both of you. You've both sort of committed your careers to focusing on delivering on the JETPs. What does success look like for you in the longer term? What would you go away thinking help deliver both for South Africa or more widely in the UK? Janice?
So success would definitely be seeing us meet those more ambitious targets in a just and inclusive way, so really have on-the-ground delivery case studies to be able to showcase how this has made a tangible difference, but also to unlock in an innovative way some of the funding challenges that we have. And I suppose just very specifically for us on the transmission grid for South Africa, if we're able to unlock funding at scale to expand and upgrade that, I feel that would be a real mark of success for our team.
Thank you. And Chris?
Yeah, for us it's about these countries supporting them to deliver their own ambitions, which are very high, so supporting ambitious countries, but also in doing that just demonstrating what can be done by others, so others feel much more confident in setting out those ambitious plans, setting out the policies that are necessary to deliver it, and working more closely with the finance community to help target that.
Excellent. Well, Chris and Janice, thank you so much for being sort of excellent Fireside conversationalists, and I'm sure if anyone wants to follow up with further details, they'll be able to find you in the coffee break.